Thank you, Mr President. Today, Australia's 3.7 million pensioners want to send a message to the Abbott Government, and that message is don't pocket our pension. And I have to say that after the announcements of the Abbott Government's first budget, I received many emails from pensioners very concerned about what was going to happen to their pensions over time. And certainly they were not convinced by the rhetoric from the Abbott Government that they were somehow worse off. They were able to do the maths on their pension and realise that actually they would be worse off. And so many of them emailed me, and I'm sure that they emailed members of the Abbott Government expressing outrage and very real concern about how they were to meet their rising costs. And we all hear those horror stories that are often reported in the daily newspapers of pensioners being afraid to use their heating in wintertime and their cooling in summertime. And this is not the way that a fair-go country such as Australia should treat those that have worked hard and contributed to Australia's lifestyle and community, and indeed contributed to our tax system in the senior years of their lives. We should be respecting those senior Australians and making sure that they are well able, either through superannuation or through the pension, to live decent lives. But we've seen both of those elements under attack by the Abbott Government. And so, in a response to those pensioners, we held a forum in the federal seat of Swan, the electorate in which I live, and hundreds of pensioners turned out and asked questions and raised very real concerns about their future well-being, and could not believe that a government that, when in opposition, promised them faithfully that there would be no cuts to pensions would do such a thing. And obviously many of them voted believing the opposition when it said there would be no cuts to pensions, but to learn that they had been hit and hit again in the budget, and no doubt those measures that the Abbott Government wants to put in place will continue. That will be a major drive by the Abbott Government. So the Prime Minister wants to cut the indexation arrangements for the pension, and that will eventually hit the hip pocket of pensioners. Currently, the pension is indexed to the highest of movements in either the Pensioner and Beneficiary Living Index of the Consumer Price Index, or benchmarked to 27.7% of male total average weekly earnings, nearly 28%. If Mr Abbott gets his way, the pension will be indexed to CPI only, so there'll be no advantage there for pensioners to be able to get the higher of. They will simply cop CPI. Now, according to the Australian Council of Social Services, because one of the ploys that those opposite like to level is it's Labor's scaremongering. Well, this is the Australian Council of Social Services who is saying that in just 10 years, Australian pensioners, if this measure gets through, will be $80 a week worse off. Now, how could you disadvantage those senior Australians who've contributed all their working lives to the tax system by ripping them off to the tune of $80 a week? And again, according to the Parliamentary Budget Office, changes to indexation of the age pension will result in $23 billion less being paid to pensioners by 2024. Now, that's not a statistic that anyone should be proud of, to be ripping that money out of the pockets of pensioners. And independent analysis by Professor Peter Whiteford shows that if the Prime Minister gets his way, the value of pensions will drop from around 28% of average weekly earnings to just a figure of 16% of average weekly earnings in 2055. And is it any wonder, with those kind of facts, that pensioners, Australia's pensioners, all 3.7 million of them, are so upset with the Abbott Government, with this disgraceful attack on their pockets? And it doesn't stop there, Mr President, We know that Mr Abbott wants to increase the pension age to 70. Now that means that either Australians work much longer or somehow they maintain themselves until they can reach pension age. And that will make the Australian pension age the highest in the world. Imagine that, being the first for that, of being so mean to those working Australians who've paid their tax all their working lives to say to them, and you can work longer and you can be amongst the highest pension rates in the world. And it goes on, the cuts to deeming thresholds. Now, you wouldn't think that a government that's allegedly so pro-private business, so pro all sorts of measures, would cut the deeming thresholds. But again, that is what they want to do. The Prime Minister wants to cut the deeming thresholds used in the pension means test from $77,400 for a couple to $50,000, a massive cut, and from $46,600 for a single down to $30,000. And this means part pensioners will get less and some pensioners will lose their pension altogether. And certainly I attended a forum, as did Senator Smith, where pensioners in the western suburbs of Perth, the more affluent suburbs, told Senator Smith in no uncertain terms that they were not happy about losing any kind of money out of their pocket. And, of course, there's also the new taxes that the Abbott government wants to, has already levelled. There's the fuel tax, but there's also the GP tax, which might have gone, but it's not forgotten. It will be back for sure. Make no mistake about that. In fact, I think Minister Ley is on the record as suggesting that the GP tax is there for a later date. And as those opposite like to cry over and over again, well, what's Labor done? Well, let's have a look at Labor's record in relation to pensions. In 2009, Labor implemented the largest increase to the pensions in 100 years. The largest increase to pensions in 100 years. That is our legacy. And that included a $70 per fortnight increase to the base rate of the pension and fixing indexation of the pension to the highest of either CPI or 27.7% of male total average weekly earnings, or the new Pensioners and Beneficiary Living Cost Index. And that measure helped ensure that the rate of the pension keeps pace with the real cost of living for pensioners. And what do those opposite want to do? Well, it seems to me that anything that Labor did that contributed to the well-being of Australians is well and truly under attack by the Abbott government. And I can assure those opposite that Labor will not stand by and allow the Abbott government to diminish the incomes of Australian pensioners. 3.7 million, that's the group that the Abbott government have well and truly got in their eyes. That's part of their target. That's the group that they want to really get with these measures. And those pensioners, let's just really understand who it is that the Abbott government is attacking. So of that 3.7 million, 2.5 million of them are aged pensioners, working Australians in their senior years who've well and truly contributed to the well-being of the Australian community. 830,000 are disability support pensions and 240,000 are carers pensioners. 70,000 are veterans pensioners. So that's the group that the Abbott government and the Prime Minister want to absolutely target with this cruel, hard measure that is part of their budget.
Senator Bernardi.
Oh, yes, thank you. My point of order is that Senator Lyon seems to have glossed over the fact that the Labor's policies are costing people $1 billion a month in interest payments.
Resume your seat. That is no point of order. There's no point of order. Senator Lyon.
President. So let those opposite try and gloss the facts over. They
Thank
speak
you.
for
It now
themselves.
being 2 p.m, we proceed to questions without notice, and I call Senator Conroy.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Abbott. will the government provide bipartisan support for Australia's future submarine project, our largest ever defence procurement project, and promise to build, maintain and sustain our new submarine fleet in Australia? Or is the government still set on delivering the Prime Minister's captain's pick to have our submarines built in Japan?
Order on my right. Order. The Leader of the Government in the Senate, representing the Prime Minister, Senator Abbott.
Mr President, I was surprised to learn today of the announcement by the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Defence spokesman in relation to Labor's plan, during which time I noted that the Leader of the Opposition boldly claimed that no one was calling for an open tender in relation to this particular project, despite despite the fact, and he's now just admitted it, that the Shadow Minister himself had called for an open tender not once, not twice, but 3 times. And so, Mr President, the Labor Party comes to this, having done nothing on the submarine program for 6 years whilst in office. They now want a process which would take another 5 years before we come to a landing in relation to this issue. Mr President, the
point of order. Order, Senator Conroy. Point of order, Senator Moore.
Mr President, it's on direct relevance to the question that was asked, which was about a statement of government support for Australia's future submarine project, particularly building, maintaining and sustaining. It's a point of order on direct relevance to the question asked.
Thank you, Senator Moore. The minister has barely gone through half his answer. I call the minister.
Mr President, what I have just done was contextualise the situation, bringing us up to date where we are now. The government's position is very clear that the safety and security of our citizens has to be the #1 priority. So the government is determined to get the best submarine capability available and the best value for money for taxpayers through a competitive evaluation process. Mr President, we are not going to prejudge what that is, Mr President, and so what the Labor Party is saying is we don't care what the defence capacity is, we don't care what the cost is.
Point of order, Senator Moore. Order, Minister.
That was your
Again,
policy.
Mr President,
Senator Conroy, you have your colleague on the
direct
feet.
relevance to the question that was asked. It's about bipartisan support to build, maintain and sustain submarines in Australia.
Well, I think the minister, Senator Moore, was answering it by way of saying that the government will not commit. But the minister has 15 seconds left to answer the question.
And, Mr President, the simple fact is, no matter what, there will be more submarines, and that means more jobs for South Australia under whatever methodology the government adopts for the acquisition
the time
of
for
our
answering
submarine
the question
fleet.
has expired. Senator Conroy, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Will the government provide bipartisan support for a proper competitive tender process with a funded definition study to ensure that Australia secures a future submarine fleet that meets Australia's defence requirements at the most competitive price for taxpayers? Or is the government still committed to your sham evaluation process designed only to deliver the Prime Minister's captain's pick, which your entire NSC committee ticked off?
The question has expired. Minister.
Mr President, just as much as the Shadow Minister just then went way over time with his question, so Labor went way over time in putting pencil to paper, and that took them 6 years of not even getting pencil to paper for the submarine program. Let that not be forgotten. And now the Shadow Minister has the audacity to come into this place and say, please join us in a bipartisan manner, when for 6 years you had misled the Australian people about where you had got to with the submarine program. Absolutely nowhere. Nowhere did they get with their submarine program in 6 years, despite media release after media release after media release. And now they say, trust us and join us in a bipartisan approach. Your actions speak louder than your words, or should I say your inactions speak
Minister.
a lot
the
louder
time for
than your
answering
words.
the question has expired. Senator Conroy, final supplementary question.
Will the government provide bipartisan support for Sweden to join Japan, Germany and France in the procurement process so that the most capable submarine designers are all competing for the work? Or is the government still committed to excluding this experienced builder so that the Prime Minister can deliver his captain's pick to Japan? And it is your government that promised to build 12 submarines in Adelaide before the last election.
Thank you, Senator Conroy. The time for asking the question has expired. Minister.
Mr President, once again over time, exactly like they did with the submarine program, have no understanding of time limits and the needs to get this project underway as soon as possible. Mr President, we have already indicated our attitude in relation to Sweden, and it really does seem interesting, does it not, that any mention of Japan is mentioned with howls of derision, yet they seem to champion the cause of Sweden. One wonders why they have this approach, the Japan bad, Sweden good. I wonder what might motivate that sort of attitude. I just wonder what might motivate that sort of attitude. It does not reflect well on the Australian Labor Party.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering the question has expired. Order on both sides. Before I call Senator Sinodinos, could I inform honourable senators the presence in the gallery today of the Australian Political Exchange Council's 9th delegation from the Philippines. And on behalf of all senators, I wish you a warm welcome to Australia and in particular to our Senate. Senator Sinodinos.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the diligent Assistant Minister for Immigration and Border Protection, Senator Cash, in her capacity representing the Minister for Infrastructure and Regional Development. Will the minister inform the Senate of how the coalition government is delivering on its promise to build the infrastructure of the 21st century?
The Assistant Minister for Immigration and Border Protection, representing the Minister for Infrastructure and Regional Development, Senator Cash.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator Sinodinos for his question. This government promised the Australian people that if we were elected to govern, we would deliver to them the infrastructure of the 21st century, and that is exactly what we are doing. This government has made an historic investment into infrastructure of $50 billion through to 2019-20. And I remind senators that our investment into infrastructure is $16.4 billion more than what those opposite promised. That's right, $16.4 billion more than what those opposite promised. Under this government, 84 projects are currently under construction right across Australia, with another 88 projects in detailed planning stages, with construction expected to commence in the near future. In terms of major works, they include the Pacific Highway in New South Wales. 60% or 397 kilometres of the final highway length has already been duplicated, with a further 123 kilometres under construction. In terms of construction workers, 2,137 construction workers were on site across the Pacific Highway at the end of last year. And then, of course, under this government, there's the Western Sydney Infrastructure Plan, where work is already underway on stage 1 of the $509 million Bringelly Road upgrade that will support the new Western Sydney Airport at Badgerys Creek. But we don't stop there, Mr President. In Queensland, construction is underway on 7 major projects. In Tasmania, construction has commenced on 7 safety work projects along the Midland Highway. In my home state of Western Australia, construction on the first stage of works along the North West Coastal Highway commenced in January 2015. We said we would deliver on infrastructure, and that is exactly what this government is doing.
Order. Order on my left. On my left. Senator Sinodinos, supplementary
Thank you,
question.
Mr President. Will the minister update the Senate on the action the government is taking to improve infrastructure in my home state of New South Wales and outline how this will create jobs in that great state?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. And as Senator Sinodinos knows, investing in infrastructure is critical for the people of Sydney, the surrounding areas, as well as those living in the regional areas of New South Wales. Our decision to work with Premier Mike Baird, Deputy Premier Troy Grant and the rest of the New South Wales Coalition Government to invest in infrastructure is ensuring that the people of New South Wales have a strong and prosperous economy. Their economy is boosted and the productivity is increased, and we have created thousands of jobs for people on the ground. In terms of our $50 billion historic investment into infrastructure, we have invested $14.9 billion into projects in New South Wales. We've included $3.6 billion for the Western Sydney Infrastructure Plan, $405 million for North Connects, $5.64 billion to complete the duplication of the Pacific Highway. This is a government that is committed to the people of New South Wales.
The time for answering the question has expired. Senator Sinodinos, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Will the minister update the Senate on how projects like West Connects will improve travel times and create jobs in Western Sydney?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. And projects like West Connects that are fully supported by a coalition government will remove up to 52 sets of traffic lights, cut travel time between Parramatta and Sydney Airport by 40 minutes, remove 3,000 trucks away from Parramatta Road and halve the commute time between the inner west and the city for those travelling by bus. This is a significant reform for the people of New South Wales. It is a significant investment in infrastructure and it is delivering real outcomes for the local people of New South Wales. The West Connects project provides 33 kilometres of continuous traffic light-free motorway to link the west and southwest of Sydney with the city and the airport and the port. And the project will create at least 10,000 jobs in Sydney. 10,000 jobs because this government knows investment in infrastructure is good for state economies and it's good for the people of New South Wales.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Abbott, and I refer to the recent release of a publication by the Minister for Trade and Investment, Mr Robb, entitled Why Australia? Benchmark Report 2015, which states, and I quote, "With more than 23 years of uninterrupted annual economic growth, a AAA sovereign risk profile and diverse globally competitive industries, Australia remains well placed to build on an impressive record of prosperity." I ask the Minister, does that sound like a budget emergency?
The Leader of the Government in the Senate, representing the Prime Minister, Senator Abbott.
Mr President, what the honourable senator has outlined is the factual circumstance of the Australian economy. Does that mean that there are not problems on the horizon? Of course not. And that is where the most failed finance minister in Australian history deliberately seeks to obfuscate and convince the Australian people that she who delivered the 6 biggest budget deficits in Australian history somehow has the solutions to Australia's problems. The simple fact is, Mr President, the simple fact is that the Australian Labor Party, not content with delivering us the 6 highest deficits, left us on a trajectory to even higher deficits. And our task now is to try to reduce those even higher deficits down lower. And so, do we have a huge economic budget task ahead of us? Yes, we do. Now, what makes that task more difficult, Mr President, is when the Australian Labor Party goes to the last election and says to the Australian people, hand on heart, believe us, we are economically responsible and we will take $5 billion worth of cuts, $5 billion worth of cuts, and then when we say we will match that $5 billion worth of cuts exactly and put that to the Parliament after the election, do you know what they did, Mr President? Man and woman, each and every one of them, lemming-like, did what Mr Shorten told them to do and voted against their own savings policies that they had taken to the Australian people. That is the economic credibility of the Australian Labor Party, and there is no better exemplar of that than the failed Finance Minister herself.
Senator Wong, a supplementary question.
Thank you. I quote again from Mr Robb's report, which states that, and I quote, "The Australian government's net debt would be 16.6% of GDP in 2015, which reinforces Australia's healthy financial position and sound economic credentials." Noting that this net debt quoted by Mr Robb is in fact higher than the peak net debt under the former government, does the minister agree that with Mr Robb that debt is low?
Minister.
Mr President, the Australian economy does have sound credentials, and the reason for that is that after the Howard Costello government, the Labor Party were given a legacy of budget surpluses and future funds, all of which were dissipated under Labor, and then the debt crisis grew. And we said to the Australian people we would deal with that situation to ensure that our economic credentials remain intact, and that is what we are doing, but no thanks to the Australian Labor Party.
Senator Moore, point of order.
Mr President, again, direct relevance to the specific question, which was quite straightforward. Does the minister agree with Mr Robb that debt is low?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Moore. Order. The order on my left. On my left. On my left, Senator Carr. Senator Cameron. Senator Cameron. Senator Cameron. Order on both sides. Order. The minister has 20 seconds in which to answer the question. I call the minister.
Thank you, Mr President. Mr President, if the manager of opposition business is so convinced that her point of order is correct, she will agree to the tabling and incorporation of the full question by the Leader of the Opposition into the Hansa, which will disclose how false she was with her point of order, seeking to obfuscate,
Thank you, Minister.
the Labor Party situation.
Order. Senator Moore on a point of order.
More than happy to table the question,
just
Mr
a moment,
President.
Senator Moore. Order on my left. Order, Senator Cameron. And on my right, Senator Abbott. Order. On both sides. Senator Moore, did you still wish to pursue a point of order?
More than happy to table the question, Mr President.
Thank you, Senator Moore. Senator Wong, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. I refer again to Mr Robb's report, which states that, and I quote, "Australia has enjoyed a sustained period of labour productivity growth, particularly in 2012-13 and 13-14. Can the minister confirm Mr Robb is correct to highlight the contribution of Labor's Fair Work Act to increased productivity in this nation?
Order. Senator Conroy. Minister.
Mr President, Australia, in general terms, has a relatively good labour productivity growth. Having said that, and this is the difficulty with the Australian Labor Party, they don't understand that a good country will always seek to strive to do better. And that is where the Australian Labor Party are stuck in a rut. Be it financial, they have no aspiration to do better. Labour productivity, no aspiration to do better. Reduced cost of living, no aspiration to do better. More jobs for the Australian people, no aspiration to do better. We have that aspiration on this side, and that is what we, Mr President, dedicate ourselves to day after day, hour after
Senator
hour,
Conroy.
whilst we have the privilege of—
Senator Moore. Senator Moore, point of order.
I will table this question as well, Mr President, but in terms of the process, the only question that was asked was, is Mr Robb correct to highlight the contribution of Labor's Fair Work Act to increase productivity? That was the question, Mr President. We'd like to hear it mentioned in the answer.
Thank you. Order on my left. Order, Senator Carr. Minister, Senator McDonald, on the point of order.
Mr President, a point of order was raised with you. I just want to speak to the point of order. How can Senator Moore table a question that is allegedly being asked by Senator Wong?
Well, there is no point of order. Order. Minister, had you concluded your answer?
Yes, Mr President. Yes.
Senator Milne. Order. Just a moment, Senator Milne. On both sides, Senator Cameron, Senator McDonald. Order. Order on both sides. Senator Milne.
President, my question is for the Minister representing the Minister for the Environment, Senator Birmingham. And I ask, is the Minister aware the Tasmanian Government has approved logging in critical nesting habitat areas for the EPBC-listed endangered swift parrot, and that's been approved in direct contravention of expert scientific advice, and the advice was that logging will not support the conservation of the species? Minister, is the government happy to stand by and watch the swift parrot logged to extinction?
Order. Order on my right. Order. Order on my right. The Assistant Minister for Education and Training representing the Minister for the Environment, Senator Birmingham.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank Senator Milne for the question. Senator Milne would well understand and appreciate, having been around these debates for a very, very long period of time, regional forest agreements operate in a manner to provide balance between environmental, social and economic outcomes for regional communities. These arrangements are in place in Tasmania, as I understand it, align with the Regional Forest Agreement, and of course they have certain exemptions under the EPBC Act that has long been the case since that Act's existence. Now, if there is evidence to suggest that forestry operations contravene the Tasmanian Regional Forestry Agreement, then those are rightly matters for the Tasmanian Government. But, Mr President, it is certainly this government's position that we want to see economic advancement in Tasmania. We want to see the creation of opportunities there, but we also want to ensure the preservation of endangered species. Our policies are all about making sure that we preserve the jobs in Tasmania as well as the threatened species in Tasmania, and we're confident that that is what the Tasmanian Government is seeking to do as well. Now, as a government, we have taken steps in relation to threatened species protection through the appointment of a Threatened Species Commissioner, which has been welcomed by outfits such as BirdLife Australia, who have praised that and acknowledged the potential there, that, and I'll quote from BirdLife Australia, "A champion for threatened species within government will help to ensure our recovery efforts and funding programs are more strategic and, importantly, throw a lifeline for Australia's threatened birds." We're serious about working in this space, but we are just as serious about making sure that jobs and opportunity continue to exist and exist in greater abundance in the future in a state like Tasmania.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Milne, a supplementary question.
Yes, thank you, Mr President. So is the minister saying that the Commonwealth has abrogated all responsibility for threatened species because of the regional forest agreements? And if not, will you now move in to actually stop the logging of this critical nesting habitat? And secondly, will you stop the automatic rollover of the forest agreements? Now we know they're a complete and total failure when it comes to protecting threatened species.
Order on my right. Order. Minister.
Thanks, Mr President. Senator Milne does like to come to this place and play judge, jury and executioner when it comes to the full assessment on these debates, and clearly her word is final in these matters. But, Mr President, that is not the case. Firstly, as I said in the original answer, and Senator Milne should appreciate this, the Regional Forest Agreements Act outside, in a sense, of the terms of the EPBC Act. So, Senator Milne, you appreciate how that works. You have every capacity through the Greens to prosecute your arguments in Tasmania with the Tasmanian government if you wish. This government is serious about supporting Tasmania in the creation of new jobs and new economic activity, but taking our responsibilities seriously for the protection of threatened species, and that is exactly what we will continue to do with our policies, but without it being to the detriment of the future of the Tasmanian economy.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, Senator Milne.
Thank you, Mr President. Will the minister now accept that handing Commonwealth responsibility to protect matters of national significance to the environment back to the states is a pathway to their destruction, given that the Tasmanian government has logged these areas in contravention of scientific advice?
Order. Minister.
Emphatically not, Mr President. Emphatically not. We all know that the Greens would not be satisfied until every logging activity in the country were brought to a halt. We all know that the Greens would not be satisfied until all jobs in these industries were pushed out of existence. We all know that in terms of extinction, the people the Greens want to make extinct are industries like the logging industry, are jobs like those of people in the logging industry. Mr President, we want to make sure that the nation's environmental laws work in the most efficient and effective way possible. That's about reducing red tape, which is exactly why our one-stop shop proposal is the right way to go, to make sure we have the least amount of red tape when it comes, or green tape when it comes to projects being approved, the maximum opportunity for jobs and projects to go ahead, as long as there are safe, sound environmental safeguards, which there absolutely will be under us.
The time for answering the question has expired. Senator the Honourable Brett Mason.
Thank you, Mr President.
Order.
Mr President, my question is to the very diligent Minister assisting the Prime Minister for the centenary of Anzac, Senator Ronaldson. Can a minister explain to the Senate how the Spirit of Anzac Centenary Experience travelling exhibition will form part of the government's agenda for the centenary of Anzac?
The Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Minister representing the Minister for the centenary of Anzac, Senator Ronaldson.
Well, thank you very much, Mr President. And, it's with a degree of sadness that I say this is probably Senator Mason's last question, and we will very much miss him. He's been a very significant contributor to this place. Mr President, today at the Australian War Memorial, the Prime Minister launched the Spirit of Anzac Centenary Experience, which will be a travelling exhibition going to 23 sites throughout Australia over the centenary of Anzac period. And the Prime Minister was joined by Mr Ian Narev from the Commonwealth Bank, Mr David Thodey and the incoming President Andy Penn from Telstra, who are the two principal financial supporters of the exhibition. And on behalf of the government, I want to thank these two companies most sincerely for their support. This is a real partnership between the corporate sector, the Australian War Memorial and the Australian government. And this will be the flagship community event in the centenary of Anzac, Mr President. From September this year, Australians right throughout the nation will have the opportunity to experience a historical perspective of the First World War, as well as an understanding of those theatres of war that we have been engaged with since that time. We are deeply committed to ensuring that all Australians, and particularly young Australians, understand the service and sacrifice of the men and women who have served this nation over the last 100 years, and always remind ourselves of the 102,000 names in the Australian War Memorial of those who have made the ultimate sacrifice. This exhibition will enable all Australians, and particularly I'm very pleased to say those in regional Australia, with a first-hand experience of the military artefacts and interpretive materials that will be there. And I'm very pleased that former Deputy Prime Minister Tim Fischer has been appointed envoy of the exhibition.
Senator Mason, a supplementary question.
Thanks, Mr President, and can I thank the Minister for his answer. Can a minister inform the Senate where the Spirit of Anzac Centenary Experience travelling exhibition will visit?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. I again thank Senator Mason for his question. Just to confirm, as I ran out of time, that Tim Fisher will be the envoy for this exhibition, which I'm sure, being a Vietnam veteran, it's a further indication of a centenary of service and sacrifice. This will go to 23 locations across Australia. It will go to the states and the Northern Territory. The exhibition will open in Albury-Wodonga. It will then go to Tasmania, and it will conclude in Sydney around Anzac Day in 2017. And what this will do, Mr. President, is ensure that not only does this nation commemorate events in some 30-odd days now at the landing of Gallipoli, but equally importantly on the Western Front and the Sinai, where this nation lost so many of its finest over that 4-year period. And so it will be an opportunity to reflect on a centenary of service and sacrifice.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Mason.
Thanks, Mr. President. And finally, will the Minister advise the Senate how the Spirit of Anzac centenary experience fits into the government's program of commemoration for the centenary of Anzac?
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I again thank Senator Mason for his questions. I said this will be the flagship commemorative event, but it does come on top of the Anzac Centenary Local Community Grants program, which I acknowledge was started under the former government, and in the last budget we topped that up. And 150 members in the other place are providing in their own communities local projects which will enable those communities to commemorate as well. And for those who have been in for those who are from country areas, they will fully understand, as I do, the level of sacrifice of those men in particular, predominantly men, who came from the smallest towns around this nation and went to Albany and left the shores from there. So Telstra and Commonwealth Bank have been absolutely pivotal in the success of us being able to do this program, and this exhibition will tell this nation's story. It must be told and needs to be told for future generations as well as those of us who are here today.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Dio Wong.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is for the Minister for Finance. For many months now, the call for a fairer distribution of GST has gone unanswered. The people of Western Australia are frustrated by the conflicting information. A little more assurance than vague hints of future promises from government ministers. From various reports, it is justifiably suggested that the government is playing politics with WA's genuine GST entitlements by holding back information in order to boost the appearance of a more accommodating budget in May. My question, therefore, is this. Will the Minister agree to release the government announcement on GST distribution before the end of this month, March 2015?
Order on my left. The Minister for Finance, Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I thank Senator Wang for that question. The government, of course, is not withholding any information. The government is managing relations with the states and territories in an orderly and methodical fashion, consistent with past practice by previous governments of both persuasions. And Senator Wang may be aware that there is a scheduled meeting of federal and state and territory treasurers in Canberra, I believe, sometime in the middle of April, and as is usual practice, in the lead-up to that meeting, the Treasurer will provide relevant information to state and territory treasurers in the usual way.
Senator Wong, supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. The WA State Treasurer was reported on the 18th March as letting it slip that our Federal Treasurer, quote, now has the review from the Grants Commission on his desk, though he won't release it until the New South Wales election is over. Will the Minister confirm that this is the case?
Minister.
Well, I can't answer for assertions that were made by the State Treasurer in Western Australia. The timing of the election in New South Wales is completely irrelevant when it comes to the timing of relevant information to lead up to the State and Territory Treasurers meeting. It has always been the practice that the Federal Treasurer provides relevant information in time for these regular meetings of the Federal and State and Territory Treasurers. That's what will happen on this occasion, and information will be provided to State and Territory Treasurers in the usual way sometime in April.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Wong, final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the Minister and his colleagues in this government not realise that every single day that WA's deprivation of its fair share of GST continues takes the state's employment and growth prospects another serious adverse step backwards?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The Australian government wants all states and territories across Australia to be the most successful they possibly can be. And of course, from that point of view, the Australian government makes judgments that are nationally fair, and we want the great state of Western Australia to be the most successful it can be. And we want Tasmania and South Australia and New South Wales and the Northern Territory to be the most successful it can be. And in that context, we've got to consider all of the relevant perspectives from people and governments from different parts of Australia, and then we've got to make decisions that are nationally fair, and that is what this government will continue to do.
Thank you, Minister. Order. Order on my left. On my left. Both sides. Senator Seselja.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister for Human Services, Senator Payne. Can the Minister update the Senate on how the coalition government is improving access to government services for all Australians?
The Minister for Human Services, Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I thank the Senator very much for his question, because we are involved in a transformation of the delivery of government services around Australia with a continually growing network of MyGov shopfronts. In January this year, we opened the new MyGov shopfront in Martin Place in Sydney, and previously in Brisbane in June of last year. And these are actually a serious innovation in the provision of government services, Mr. President. We bring together Medicare, Centrelink, the Australian Tax Office, the PCEHR, the Personally Controlled Electronic Health Record, the Department of Veterans Affairs, I would say to my colleague Senator Ronaldson, the NDIS, and also most recently Australian Job Search. So we are continually adding to the number of services that Australians are able to obtain access to by visiting the single MyGov shopfront. And we are going to roll out more of those, Mr. President, I'm pleased to say. So for my colleagues in other capital cities around Australia, in Adelaide, in Perth and in Melbourne. And those three will come in the rest of this calendar year, Mr. President. So they don't just deliver more integrated services for customers, because that's what customers are looking for. They want to be able to do the business they transact with government in one place at the one time as far as possible. But we are also able to help our customers engage in the online space with us. In the MyGov shopfronts in Sydney and in Brisbane, we have a set of app bars, for example, Mr. President, with iPads where customers can acquaint themselves with the use of apps and then replicate that on their smartphones or their own other devices. We have a whole range of self-service terminals, and in fact, the Senator will recall from our visit to Woden earlier this year that the take-up of that sort of self-service engagement is ever increasing, Mr. President. And the growing demand shows us that there is in fact a requirement for more and more services to be coordinated, to be integrated like that, so that customers are able to access them where they want and when they want.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering the question has expired. Senator Seselja, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Minister. Can the Minister advise the Senate how Australians are responding to online government services?
Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr. President, and again I thank the Senator very much for his question, because the numbers actually speak for themselves. So, as at today, we have over 6 million MyGov accounts across our Australian customer base, and the average growth is 20,000 new accounts every day, Mr. President. So the take-up is considerable. Obviously, in the tax period in June, July, August of last year, that take-up was particularly significant, and we're looking forward to that happening again. But we're not just doing it in that space of the MyGov account. As at the end of February, the end of last month, Mr. President, since May of the previous year, we had sent over 40 million digital letters across the country. Now, what that saves in terms of the snail mail process is significant, but the amount of the ease of access that it gives to our customers is what is most important in that space. In the Medicare online transactions over the last financial year, the number of transactions increased by a third.
The question has expired. Senator Seselja, a final supplementary question.
Thank you. Can the Minister explain to the Senate how such initiatives support the Coalition's e-government and digital economy policy?
Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr President. And the senators will be aware of the recent announcement of the establishment of the Digital Transformation Office in government. And the MyGov online entry point is absolutely vital to delivering our e-government and digital transformation technology. It was an election commitment of ours to shift major services and interactions with individuals online, and we are committed to doing that by 2017 so that all major transactions with government can be conducted end-to-end digitally. We are going to keep that promise, Mr President, and we are going to be able to meet that commitment. What the Digital Transformation Office will do, Mr President, is to leverage MyGov to transform the way that services are delivered, not just to individuals, Mr President, but to business as well. And that will be transformational for the way business is able to engage with government. And so staff from my department are embedded within the interim DTO, Mr President, and will continue to work very closely with them in the development of that project.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering the question has expired. Senator Day.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Affairs. Minister, whilst I am encouraged by news out of my home state yesterday that in order to open up job opportunities, penalty rates have been reduced, this will not, however, benefit people elsewhere in Australia, particularly those in remote regions. And on this point, Minister, I note that an Aboriginal person, for example, living in a remote region can hunt kangaroos, turtles and dugongs, enlist in the armed forces, get married, have children, buy a house, vote, but they can't take a job under terms and conditions which they decide are best for them. Minister, the social costs of unemployment amongst Aboriginal people, poor health, depression, substance abuse, crime, domestic violence, teenage pregnancy, even suicide are so horrendous. Why are they not permitted to make up their own minds about getting a job?
On my left, Senator Cameron. Order. On both sides. Senator Back. Senator Birmingham. Senator Cameron. Senator Collins. Senator Cameron. On both sides. Senator Bernardi. The Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Senator Scullion.
Thank you, Mr President. I thank Senator Day for the question. I'd like to also acknowledge his 40-odd years in working in remote Indigenous communities. First of all, there should be no distinction between the wages and conditions available to our First Australians and any other worker in Australia. So, for those issues in South Australia, should those be changes in the hospitality industry within Adelaide, they certainly should be available in other areas like the APY lands. I understand these are processes at a state level, but hopefully if those matters are good for them in one state, they should be good for individuals in another. The focus of this government in terms of Indigenous employment in remote areas is to ensure that we seize every single opportunity to transition people into training and ultimately real sustainable employment. That, of course, was the whole focus of the Forest Report, Creating Parity. We've got a strong, coordinated employment strategy to ensure that Indigenous people are able to take up job opportunities. So from 1st of July this year, major reforms to remote employment services in remote communities will end passive welfare and give people a pathway to real jobs. 29 vocational and training centres are going to end training for training's sake. The employment parity initiatives to help big employers get into employment parity of 3%, which I announced last week, will create 20,000 jobs. By 2020, 3% of new government contracts will be afforded to Indigenous businesses. And by 2018, 3% of the Commonwealth public service employees will be Indigenous. We've made a good start, Senator, through you, Mr President. Since September 2013, 23,100 Indigenous Australians have been insisted into employment under our new job programs.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Day, a supplementary question.
Thank you. Minister, rather than shuffling young Aboriginal people through the job services industry, that, in the words of Noel Pearson, subjects them to bureaucratic straitjackets and red tape that kills innovation and social entrepreneurship. Why doesn't the government consider trialling community-based exemptions to let young Aboriginal people negotiate employment opportunities which suit them?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. I again thank the Senator for the question. Look, any ideas, Mr President, including yours, Senator Day, deserves consideration on the basis that it gets support from the community. This government has made it clear that getting Indigenous adults into work is one of our highest priorities in improving the lives of our first Australians. That's why we've reformed remote employment services. Again, from the 1st of July this year, job seekers in remote communities will be able to participate in continuous work-like activity and meaningful work experience. And Senator, I assure you, it won't be people standing around with shovels or painting rocks. It will be genuine activities that equip people to take on real jobs that, as Marshall Langdon just said in The Australian, do exist in remote communities, or where they choose to move to take up employment opportunities. These reforms will include $25 million invested each year to build local businesses which will underpin the local economy, create jobs and offer opportunities for job seekers to get practical work experience.
Senator Day, a final supplementary question.
Mr President, in the last census, Aboriginal unemployment is over 20%. Warren Mundine has said allowing people to languish on welfare and dismissing them as being unable to work is not treating them with dignity. When will the government restore their dignity and allow them to enter the workforce under terms and conditions which suit them?
Minister.
The government believes that everyone who can work should work. If jobs aren't available, then people need the opportunity to undertake meaningful activity that builds their skills and contributes to their community in the longer term. That's why we've reformed remote employment services. Employment gives people financial independence, control over their lives and the ability to provide for their family's future. Combined, our Indigenous employment initiatives have the potential to change the face of our workforce and our country, to create vibrant, thriving Indigenous businesses that ensure that our workforce reflects the strong diversity and strength of our nation. It is just everyone's task to ensure that we close the employment gap between Indigenous Australians and the rest of our country once and for all.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Carr.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Industry and Science, Senator Robertson. I refer to a report released today showing that $145 million worth of economic activity, or 11% of the Australian economy, relies directly on advanced mathematics and physical sciences. I further refer to the government's last budget, which cut more than $1.5 billion from Australian science, research and commercialisation. Given the overwhelming evidence that science underpins prosperity, can the minister rule out further cuts to science research in the next budget?
On my right, the Minister for Veterans Affairs representing the Minister for Industry and Science, Senator Ronaldson.
Well, thank you very much, Mr President. Senator Carr's been a busy old sausage over the last 24 hours. Clearly, Senator Conroy's hidden his book North Korea on $10 a day. He's had to do something else since. What I will say, Mr President, in relation to this, is Senator Carr constantly is reflecting back onto his own times of inactivity. And as we have said, and I've said before, this government is deeply committed to science, research and innovation. But they're not just words. They're not just words. There's $9.2 billion in science, research and innovation. And people talk about where this is leading to. Is this going to lead to jobs? Is there advanced manufacturing jobs being grown? Well, just out of interest, Mr President, I was advised this morning that there's been a growth in manufacturing jobs in the February quarter up from the November quarter. And indeed, 922,400 jobs in the February quarter, 913,200 in the November quarter. And they're predominantly full-time jobs. Full-time jobs, Mr President.
Point of order, Senator Moore.
It's direct relevance to the question, Mr President. It is there is a specific question which I'm sure that Senator Carr could table, which actually says, can the minister rule out further cuts to science and research in the next budget? That was the question, Mr President, and we've got 30 seconds to go.
Thank you, Senator Moore. I will remind the minister of the question. He does have 30 seconds in which to answer. Minister.
Thank you. Well, we now know the Australian Labor Party views increase in manufacturing jobs as bad news. Well, we think they are good news. And the 9 points to, well, I mean, you know, the worst finance minister, in Australia's history. Order, minister. Minister. Senator Moore, a point of order.
A direct relevance to the question, Mr President. You've drawn the attention of the minister to the question, and we only have 8 seconds to go at this stage.
Thank you, Senator Moore. Senator Bernardi, a point of order.
Yes, it is.
Just a moment, Senator Bernardi. On my left. On my left, Senator Lyons. Senator Bernardi.
President, I was listening to the minister comprehensively cover the question, and I couldn't hear him because of the disorderly interjections from Senator Wong, which were rather shrill and abusive.
Thank you. Thank you. On the point of order, Senator Wong.
I said he couldn't answer the question. I've been accused of being abusive, Mr President. I will put it on the record. I said he can't answer the question.
Right, there's no point of order. There is Senator Abbott's on the point of order.
Mr President, Senator Wong knows that she said a lot more. She said a lot more than that which she has put on the record.
There is no point of order.
This is disgraceful behaviour.
There are no Senator Wong on a point of order.
Well, if I'm asked to withdraw something that's been alleged, then they can tell me.
I don't think you're asked to withdraw anything, Senator Wong. Now, in relation to the order, Senator Lyons. In relation to the points of order, Senator Collins on both sides. In relation to the point of order, in relation to Senator Moore's point of order, I will remind the minister of the question. In relation to Senator Bernardi's point of order, I'll remind all senators that the noise has been intolerable again today, and interjections are completely disorderly. Senator Ronaldson, you have 8 seconds in which to answer the question. Senator.
Well, thank you very much, Mr President. In my representative capacity, I've been telling the chamber exactly what the government's commitment is to science and innovation and manufacturing.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering the question has expired. Senator Carr, a supplementary
Thank you,
question.
Mr President. I ask a supplementary question. I refer to the same report which found that the hard sciences account for 7% of employment and contribute 23% of exports. Can the minister explain why this government remains committed to cutting support for science and engineering degrees by more than 28%?
Minister. Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. Of course, Senator Carr won't refer to the $1.82 million to secure operation of vital scientific assets. Won't talk about the government investing a further $12 million to improve the focus on the STEM subjects that he was referring to. So when he talks about cuts, why doesn't he talk about the increase in STEM funding? Why doesn't he talk about the $3 billion for CSIRO? Senator Carr has shown his extraordinary ignorance again in relation to this matter, and science, technology, engineering and mathematics is indeed STEM.
On my left.
So what I'll say to the chamber before, and what I'll say about is, when we talk about cuts, I'll table a document which refers to the cuts under the Australian Labor Party when Senator Carr was the minister, and I will table those.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Carr,
Well, thank you, Mr President. Now, in light of this minister's failure to answer a single question about the Cooperative Research Centres program yesterday, or already today, is the minister now able to assure the Senate that the program will not be further cut or abolished in the upcoming budget?
Minister. Minister. Minister.
Well, thank you.
On my left.
I think the chamber might be more surprised that I talked about what was in the budget as opposed to what may or may not be in the budget. But maybe, look, I think in the interest of, fairness, so we do have a proper debate. I might just go through I might just go through the Australian Labor Party's cuts in relation to this matter. So in the 2014 budget—
Minister Ronaldson. Order on both sides. Senator Conroy, that includes you. Senator Cameron, a point of order.
Thanks, Mr. President. This is on relevance. The minister is saying that he's in a debate. He has to answer a question, something he has failed to do ever since he's been on the front bench.
Thank you, Senator Cameron. There is no point of order. Minister, you have the call.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And what Senator Cameron has not done since he's been on the front bench is ask a question of Senator Payne. Not one question since September 2013 has been asked by the man who just—
Minister. Order. Order on both sides. That means you too, Senator Conroy. Senator Moore, a point of order.
It is on direct relevance to the question asked by Senator Carr. It's about Minister being able to assure the Senate that the program will not be further cut or abolished in the upcoming budget. Very straightforward, Minister. I'd ask you to draw the minister's attention.
Thank you, Senator Moore. I draw the minister's attention to the question. He has 19 seconds in which to answer. Minister.
Thank you. Well, as Minister for Finance said, the second Tuesday in May the budget will be announced. So I'll just go through the Labor cuts. 2014 budget, efficiency dividend of 2%, saving of $902 million.
Minister. Point of order, Senator Moore.
Mr. President, again direct relevance, and I seek your support or assurance in this case whether reading out a list actually responds directly to our question. Is that directly relevant?
Thank you, Senator Moore. Just prior to the minister— Order, Senator Cameron. Just prior to the minister referring to the list, as you've just mentioned, Senator Moore, he did indicate that the answer will be in the budget in May, which was part of the question. But as always, ministers are entitled to enhance their answers. And order. The minister has to— Minister, have you concluded your answer?
No, I haven't done it. In fact, there was the cessation of the facility funding, $384
Thank you,
million.
Minister. The time for answering the question has expired. Order. Minister, the time has expired. Senator McGrath.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Assistant Minister for Education and Training, Senator Birmingham, representing the Minister for Education and Training. Can the minister update the Senate on the benefits that are flowing to small and medium businesses from the Coalition's Industry Skills Fund?
The Assistant Minister for Education and Training, representing the Minister for Education and Training, Senator Birmingham.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Senator McGrath for the question. The Industry Skills Fund is a shining example, Mr. President, of this government's commitment to support real training that connects with real jobs, Mr. President. It provides $476 million in funding over the next 4 years that will support some 200,000 training opportunities for people right around Australia. But importantly, they are training opportunities that relate to job-specific training rather than what we saw those opposite engage in too much of, which was training for training's sake. Mr. President, employers who contribute to the costs of the training through this program get to decide and model training for what is needed to grow their business, to grow employment opportunity in their business and therefore to create more jobs right around Australia. And I'm pleased to advise that the first grants under this program have started to flow. One of those first ones was to this iconic South Australian ice cream manufacturer, Golden North. And I know that ice cream is very dear to Senator McGrath's heart, as I'm sure it is to many in this chamber, and I would implore all, even you, Senator Wong, I'm sure enjoy Golden North from time to time. Mr. President, Golden North will benefit from $40,000 through the fund, which will assist in the cost of training 30 of its staff. This, of course, demonstrates that through modest contribution we can make a major difference, because the funding will help develop new opportunities for the company in China and Southeast Asia by providing their employees with skills in competitive systems to improve factory efficiency. Barker Trailers, a regional business in Victoria, will benefit, as will a business in outback Queensland. All up, a number of businesses are already in the early days benefiting from this program.
Thank you, Minister. Senator McGrath, supplementary question.
Yes, a supplementary. Can the minister advise the Senate how the Industry Skills Fund will assist businesses to grow the Australian economy?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Of course, the training places approved to date, 72% have gone to micro and small businesses, demonstrating the creation of opportunity for those small businesses to grow themselves and grow export markets for Australia into the future. Already, just in the first couple of months of this program, 115 businesses are benefiting from the training opportunities. In contrast, as I said before, Labor wasted billions of dollars on programs that failed to deliver training that actually connected with real job outcomes. A review into Labor's failed $2.1 billion productivity placements program found it was impossible to tell who had even been trained, Mr President, impossible to estimate how many people had been trained, and difficult to determine who had even been awarded contracts to deliver the training. By contrast, Mr President, this program under the Coalition connects training with jobs and real employers.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering the question has expired. Senator McGrath, a final supplementary
Yes, a final supplementary. Can the minister advise the Senate how the Industry Skills Fund is helping to address youth unemployment?
Minister.
Thanks, Mr President. Importantly, the government, as part of this overall program, is investing $44 million in trialling 2 innovative youth pilot programs under the Industry Skills Fund, which will target and provide the opportunity for individual training programs to be tailored to the needs of those individual young people. Under the Training for Employment Scholarships program, up to 7,500 job-specific training places will be created across 11 regions, targeting young people aged 18 to 24 who are not in full-time employment or study. Employers must hire the employee for more than 25 hours per week for a minimum of 12 months, but in return the employer is supported with reimbursement up to $7,500 for the costs of up to 26 weeks of personally tailored training to help give this young person often their first job and an opportunity to step into the workforce.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Abbott.
I ask that further questions be placed on notice.
Senator Siewert.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. Pursuant to Standing Order 74.5 on questions on notice, I seek an explanation from the Assistant Minister for Social Security, Senator Fifield, as to why a question number 1487, asking for a copy of the report of the review of the East Kimberley Youth Service Network, hasn't been answered.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I think with these sort of matters, notice is usually given to the representing minister that an explanation will be sought. I'm not sure whether that occurred, but given there are obviously many hundreds of questions which are placed on notice, I'm not in a position at this point in time to give an explanation, but I'll certainly take that on notice and do so.
Senator Siewert.
Mr Deputy President, thank you. Can I'll take note of the Minister's answer and firstly explain that my office has been in contact with the Minister's office, in fact on several occasions over the last couple of days, with your office over the last couple of days about the answer to this question, because we are very keen to get a copy of this report. This is a report into, and the reason I'm asking now, I should say up front, is because this pertains very clearly to the effectiveness of remote communities, and also and of course that's on everyone's minds at the moment with the government's in Western Australia's consideration of closing up to 150 communities, and this pertains to a program that, from what I understand, has had some important impacts and also looks at what could point to how we could support remote communities better. This particular example relates to the East Kimberleys, as I said, but is particularly pertinent to the remote community of Ringasoke. and it's Ringasoke's located in the Kimberley region in Western Australia. It's approximately 100 kilometres from the Northern Territory border. It consists of about 100 people. And there are about 6 members of the community who are non-Aboriginal, so it's an Aboriginal community, and it's about 3 hours' drive from Halls Creek, which is the next largest population centre. In 2010, the Federal Attorney-General, in collaboration with the then FACSIA, commenced the Indigenous Justice Program in this Aboriginal community and also in 15 other communities within the Kimberley region. I've been contacted by people that were in fact workers on that program and workers in the community at the time, and who have particularly community development skills and mental health expertise. They describe the Federal Indigenous Justice Program as being tasked to primarily focus on young Indigenous men and having 5 clear goals: less trouble with the police, less time before the courts, less incarceration, less trouble with alcohol and drugs, less incidents of youth suicide. In other words, the key prime areas when you're talking about some of the issues that cause disadvantage in Aboriginal communities. And one of the workers describes being in Halls Creek in February 2010, along with the Indigenous Justice Program workers from the neighbouring communities. And those workers provided a summary of the project provided by the West Australian Attorney-General's delegate, and the 5 goals as identified, they said they identified those because they cost us a fortune to address, they are interrelated and can cause enormous suffering to individuals, their families and wider community. And it said if we had some guaranteed methods for achieving the 5 goals of this program, we would be training you as to how to foster these. But as you know, the rate of incarceration and youth suicide in this demographic, already the highest in the country, is increasing, and we have no pat ants solutions to teach. That's why they were investing in this program. And for this reason, you are being asked to live and work in these communities for 3 years and address our quarterly reporting procedures. They were asked to explain the 5 goals to their respective community councils, sit with the old people and discuss the goals and build a rapport with the young people. Then be directed by the community council and their centres as to how and what you will do to achieve these 5 goals. And the worker said to me that our quarterly reporting has been designed the quarterly reporting was designed to capture information relating to these 5 goals and allow for analysis and comparison between the 6 communities of the project and look then at the conclusions. Whatever successes stand out from this analysis, we hope to be able to copy and reuse elsewhere. Again, you can see why I think this program is really important for us to have the review of the program to see what actually does work. The program, which commenced in late 2009 and early 2010, was a bit delayed, but it was carried out. And the review was done in 2012 by Allen Consulting Group, who we know carry out these sorts of analyses in the past. We believe it's really important that this report be made available, and that's why I've had people contacting me to ask for this review to be made available. And I'm renewing this call for it to be made available because of the current debate that's going on. These continue to be 5 burning issues for communities, for the families living in these communities and for other communities. This report to date has not been released to the public, and people are asking for it to be released so that we can learn what happened in this particular project. You'll understand from the goals and the way I've just described it that it is a rather unique project that I hope has a lot of learnings for the community. I therefore ask the Minister, that's why I asked the Minister for an explanation, and I would like to move that report be made available publicly by the end of March.
That's all right. Yes, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. I thank Senator Siewert for raising this matter. I have checked with my office, and there was one contact from your office, and anyway, I've advised there's one contact with my office, but checking to see if there were, if I can continue, if there were further. And my understanding is that my office indicated that they would check to see where the answer was and come back on that matter. also advised that it wasn't indicated that the matter would be raised here. So I just indicate that that is the situation. It is part of the responsibilities that I have as a minister representing, and as I say, my office indicated that we would come back to you as to where that was at, and I will advise you myself, Senator, to see where that matter is at.
The question is that the Senate take note of the minister's response. Those of that opinion say aye. Against say no. I think the ayes have it. Senator Cash.
Deputy President, and I table a response to an order for the production of documents agreed to by the Senate on Wednesday, the 18th of March 2015, relating to the West Connects Road project in New South Wales.
Are there any motions to take note of answers? Senator Conroy.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I rise to take note of the answer given by the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Abbott, on submarines. And today, Labor has extended the hand of bipartisanship to the government on submarines. As we all know, this decision will transcend governments and generations. It is one of the most important defence capability decisions that our country will ever make. And prior to the 2013 election, there was bipartisan support for the future of the submarine project. Genuine bipartisan support. That promise was to build our future submarines in Australia. But since coming to government, the Prime Minister has been crab-walking away from that promise. It's an open secret. Even Senator Edwards must know by now that the Prime Minister, Mr Abbott, has a handshake deal with Japan to build our new submarines. It's also clear that to save his own job, he traded submarines for votes in the Liberal Party room. To win those votes, the government has announced a sham competitive evaluation process. But be in no doubt, Senator Edwards and those opposite, this process is being retrofitted to still deliver the Prime Minister his captain's pick for having the submarines built in Japan. The dysfunction and chaos within the Liberal Party is infecting the submarine decision. And Senator Abbott, Mr Deputy President, may not be in the NSC, I'm not sure. He may not be. But if he was in the NSC, he was one of the ministers who sat there when they went round the table last October with officials and ministers, and I hope Senator Edwards is listening, went around the NSC table and said, yes or no, deal with Japan, no tender, build in Japan. We announce it with Prime Minister Abe in November at G20. So, Senator Abbott, if you were a member of the NSC, you know that's the truth. If you weren't, I accept that if you weren't, you may not have been privy to it because they didn't want to bring it to Cabinet. But they drew up the press releases in the Department of Defence. They drew them up for an announcement in November of this year. So poor Senator Edwards has been sitting there last year, thank you, Senator Edwards, has been sitting there being treated like a mushroom by his own front bench, by his own ministers on the NSC, treated like a mushroom, just like every other person in South Australia. Just like every other person in South Australia. And that is why we offer the opportunity today. We reach out and we say, we've outlined a fair and proper process to deliver the best submarine for Australia at the most effective price for taxpayers. The key criteria is to ensure that our future submarines are built in Australia. This is a return to the bipartisanship that we saw before the elections. But we're not the only political party offering such a deal. We're not. The Conservative British Prime Minister, David Cameron, he recognises how important it is for the United Kingdom to build and maintain its own warships. Under Labor's process, we would include France, Germany, Japan and Sweden in the competitive tender. We would ensure that the final bids give a guarantee of submarine performance, Australia's ownership of all intellectual property. And this is the test for you today. Right here in your 5-minute contribution, Senator Edwards, will you commit that the next generation of submarines be built, maintained and sustained in Australia? That's all you're being asked to support today, bipartisan. Build them, maintain them and sustain them here in Australia, or you're going to cave into the captain's pick again.
Your time has expired. Senator Edwards.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy President. And what a disingenuous rant that was. Let me talk to you about crab walking. Where was Senator Conroy when he was in the Cabinet, when he was crab walking from Minister Fitzgibbon, when he was the Defence Minister? Where was he, Senator Conroy, when Minister Faulkner was crab walking from the issue of the submarine build? Where was Senator Conroy when Minister Smith, the Defence Minister, 3 Defence Ministers in 6 years in the defence portfolio, where were you then, Senator Conroy? How trite of you to come in here and accuse us of inaction on building submarines when you sucked $16.3 billion out of the defence budget and left it in a vacuum. A complete vacuum. And Senator Gallagher will come along here, and he was down there that day along with the other South Australian senators when the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Shorten, did his big xenophobic rant on the back of a truck to all of the converted...
Just resume your seat, please. Well, that's not a point of order. Order. I'll give you the call when the Senate comes to order. Senator Edwards.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. And I actually respect that interjection from Senator Gallagher, because I actually know that if there could have been a further place, if he could have got to Norfolk Island that day to a hearing, he probably would have, because I know him to be a fair and reasonable person. I've worked with Senator Gallagher. There's not an island far enough away he could have found himself to be that day. Well, you don't know him that well, then. There wasn't a place he couldn't hide to get away from that rant from the Leader of the Opposition, spruiking the Labor lines down there to the handful of fluoro vest, part of the union, the union spruikers that are working up the fear and loathing about the government. We're actually doing something. Senator Conroy, through you, Mr Deputy President, Senator Conroy, I hope you're listening, because it was only a few Fridays ago that the Abbott government dealt Australian shipbuilders into the largest defence procurement project in the Commonwealth's history. What a day that was. Of course, now we've got some action. Do you know what we've got going on in Adelaide over the next couple of days? We've got a submarine convention going on. When did we have one of those in your glorious reign of submarine building in the Rudd-Gillard reign of sucking the defence budget dry? When did we have one of those? You know why? Because the light at the end of the tunnel, instead of being a freight train like it was when the Labor Party was in power, the light at the end of the tunnel is a build. Australian shipbuilders, if they get their act together, have the opportunity to build a submarine defence force that is world-class, just like the Collins class is, and it runs. Now they've got an opportunity to do it. If the union movement come together and stop having actually, if they stop protesting and realise that they have to sharpen their pencils and get together with management of the ASC and other shipbuilders in Fort Jackson, Williamtown and Osborne, if they realise that they've actually got to sit down and get their act together on this, stop wasting their time protesting, they are going to have a real shot at this. Don't waste a nanosecond is the message I give to the union movement. A union movement who has been crying for this opportunity, a union movement that has been ranting and raving. And tell you what, I listened to them, Senator Conroy, and I heard the experts. And you know what? That's why I've made the representations that I have, and I'll stand behind them. But don't you shrilly come in here lecturing us about crab walking. Absolute, complete hypocrisy. Let me talk about, if you want, and I just haven't got time, I wish I had another 5 minutes. Nearly 80 major defence acquisitions completed by Labor after July 2007. Nearly 70% were single-source procurements. So much for Labor's commitment to open tenders. If you were actually committed to...
Senator, your time has expired. Senator Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. And look, I just want to get on the record very early in the piece. Some of the comments that have been made around the Collins class. Now, Ian McPhedran says, in what has been regarded as one of the most incredible naval shipbuilding feats of the modern era, the first Swedish-designed Collins-class submarine, HMS Collins, was commissioned from a former greenfield site at Port Adelaide in July 1996, just 9 years after the project began. The Collins-class boats are extremely stealthy and have been known to sneak right under US aircraft carriers and photograph their keels. So we have a very, very good, successful base here. We have world-recognised technology in these, technology efficiency and shipbuilding capability in these submarines. What we don't have, and if I can use Senator Abbot's metaphor from his generous contribution to Senator Lundy yesterday, what we don't have is people looking forward, telling the South Australian community that we need to do this, build, design, sustain, maintain in Australia. We have, to use his analogy, looking one way and doing another. And that's exactly what this coalition government is doing. Looking one way, saying, nothing to see here, South Australian public, we'll give you 500 jobs. That debacle of a press conference, the debacle of where it came out, the competitive evaluation and the inability of the minister to actually describe what that was, but said, don't worry, there'll be 500 jobs in it. Yeah, no idea. Competitive evaluation. And we just really need to go back and revisit some of the earlier contributions. When we questioned the Defence Minister, we were labelled incongruous and stupid. He went on to say that, the ASC couldn't build a canoe. And all of the evidence in South Australia, with the supplement that has been read by thousands of South Australians this week, is to the contrary. What's happened is the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister of Japan got together, did a deal, as Senator Conroy has said, the National Security Committee ticked off on revoking the promise. We'll build 12 submarines right here in Adelaide. That went out the window. And if you want to go into it deeper, Senator